Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a moment to step back from our conditioning, our habits, and our deeply wired perceptions and ask a fundamental question. How do men really perceive sex? Now, if we look at this purely from a biological standpoint, men's brains are structured to prioritize reproduction. Testosterone drives desire, and dopamine fuels pursuit. In the most primal sense, the male brain is wired for conquest, for the thrill of the chase. But that's just the surface. If we go deeper into the realm of neuroscience, psychology, and energy, we begin to see that sex is not just a physical act, but an intricate dance between the mind, body, and spirit. When a man engages in intimacy, his brain is flooded with neurochemicals. Dopamine for pleasure, oxytocin for bonding, and vasopressin for attachment. If a man is purely in a primal state, the dopamine rush is the driving force, seeking novelty, seeking excitement. But if he is emotionally present, if he has cultivated self-awareness, then oxytocin takes the lead, deepening connection and fostering a sense of unity. But here's where it gets interesting. How a man views sex is largely shaped by subconscious conditioning. His upbringing, past relationships, societal expectations, they all program his mind in ways he may not even be aware of. Some men use sex as a means of validation. Others view it as a form of power or escape. And yet, some see it as a sacred act of connection. Now, let's talk about energy. In every sexual encounter, there is an exchange of energy. If one or both partners carry unresolved emotional wounds, those energies merge, creating patterns. Patterns that can either elevate or deplete you. This is why it is so important to be aware of who you share intimacy with. So how do we shift this perception? How do we move from an unconscious act to a conscious experience? It begins with awareness. When a man understands that sex is not just an outlet, but a form of creation, of emotion, of connection, of shared energy, his approach changes. He begins to see beyond the impulse, beyond the transient pleasure, into something deeper, something transformative. And for those who seek true intimacy, true connection, the key is to shift from the habitual to the intentional. When sex is no longer an escape, but a sacred exchange, it has the power to elevate not just the body, but the mind and the soul. So my question to you is this: how can we become more conscious in our relationships? Because when we elevate our awareness, we elevate our experiences. And when we elevate our experiences, we elevate our lives. The male brain is biologically designed to prioritize attraction and reproduction. But this goes far beyond the simple notion of physical desire. At the core of male sexual perception lies the complex interplay of neurochemistry, evolution, and subconscious programming that influences how men view and approach intimacy. From an evolutionary standpoint, men have been wired to seek out partners based on visual and biological cues that indicate fertility, health, and vitality. This is why physical attraction plays such a significant role in male arousal. It is an instinctive mechanism deeply embedded in their genetic coding. But attraction is not merely about beauty. It is about signals. The way a person carries themselves, their confidence, body language, tone of voice, and even scent all contribute to this subconscious assessment. At a neurochemical level, attraction triggers a surge of dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. This is the same neurotransmitter responsible for pleasure, motivation, and addiction. When a man finds someone attractive, his brain releases dopamine, creating a sensation of excitement and anticipation. This is why the early stages of attraction often feel exhilarating. There is a biochemical rush that fuels desire and pursuit. However, this also explains why some men become fixated on novelty, always seeking the next high that new attraction provides. Testosterone, the dominant male hormone, also plays a crucial role. Higher levels of testosterone are linked to increased libido, competitiveness, and the drive to pursue potential partners. This is why men often experience a surge of sexual energy when they feel confident, successful, or dominant in a given situation. It's not just about the physical body, it's about the state of mind. When a man feels powerful, his testosterone levels rise, increasing his attraction to those he perceives as desirable. But beyond the primal and biological components, there is another dimension to how men view sex, one that is shaped by social conditioning and personal experiences. From an early age, men receive messages about what attraction and sex should mean. Cultural narratives, media representations, and even childhood experiences influence how they form connections. If a man grows up in an environment where intimacy is associated with power, he may unconsciously equate sexual conquest with self-worth. On the other hand, if he has been raised with an understanding of emotional connection, he may associate sex with bonding and vulnerability. And one of the most overlooked aspects of male attraction is emotional safety. While it is often assumed that men seek only the physical, the reality is that emotional security plays a powerful role in long-term attraction. A man who feels truly seen and understood by a partner will experience a deeper form of connection, which in turn enhances his perception of sexual intimacy. This is where oxytocin, the bonding hormone, comes into play. While dopamine and testosterone drive initial attraction, oxytocin strengthens long-term attachment, allowing sexual desire to evolve beyond mere physical impulse. And basically, oxytocin is dopamine. What it means is it's the inherent drug of the human brain. Additionally, men, like women, are influenced by energy. They may not always recognize it consciously, but they respond to the emotional and energetic states of those around them. If a potential partner radiates confidence, warmth, and authenticity, it creates a gravitational pull that goes beyond physical appearance. This is why some people, despite not fitting conventional beauty standards, possess a magnetic presence that draws others in. Understanding how men perceive attraction and sex requires moving beyond stereotypes and looking at the intricate web of biology, psychology, and energy that shapes their experiences. It is not just about the body. It is about the mind, the emotions, and the deeper subconscious patterns that guide behavior. When we begin to recognize these factors, we move from seeing attraction as something purely instinctual to something that can be understood, refined, and transformed into a more conscious experience. Men's perception of sex exists on a spectrum between physical gratification and emotional connection, and their position on this spectrum is influenced by a combination of biology, psychology, and personal experiences. At a fundamental level, men are biologically driven to seek physical intimacy due to the influence of testosterone, which fuels libido, aggression, and the pursuit of sexual experiences. Something called vaporism, this is why many men initially view sex as a goal-oriented act, something that provides pleasure, release, and a temporary escape from stress or emotional burdens. However, the depth of their connection to sex is largely shaped by their emotional awareness and personal development. For many men, physical intimacy can feel like a means of validation, a way to confirm their desirability, strength, or status. This often stems from cultural conditioning that equates a man's worth with his sexual success. From a young age, many boys are taught, directly or indirectly, that their masculinity is reinforced by their ability to attract and engage in sexual relationships. This creates an early association between sex and self-esteem, leading some men to prioritize the physical aspect of intimacy while suppressing emotional vulnerability. However, as men mature emotionally, they begin to experience sex differently. Instead of being just a physical act, it becomes a way to connect on a deeper level with a partner. This is where the role of oxytocin, the bonding hormone, becomes significant. While dopamine and testosterone drive initial attraction and pursuit, oxytocin is released during physical touch, intimacy, and especially during orgasm, reinforcing emotional attachment. And even during emotional attachment, we know that pleasure, that release, drives emotional attachment. A man who allows himself to be emotionally present during intimacy will experience sex as something far more profound than just a momentary pleasure. It becomes a pathway to trust, connection, and even healing. Men who prioritize the physical over the emotional often do so not because they lack the capacity for emotional connection, but because they have been conditioned to separate sex from vulnerability. This is especially true for men who have experienced rejection, emotional trauma, or societal pressure to suppress their feelings. For them, Keeping sex purely physical is a defense mechanism, a way to avoid the perceived risks of attachment, rejection, or emotional dependency. This explains why some men struggle with deep intimacy, even in long-term relationships. They have not yet learned to bridge the gap between physical desire and emotional connection. Do you ever experience any of these things in your relationship where you have to back off from the physical to get to the emotional? Conversely, when a man feels safe in a relationship, safe to express his emotions without judgment, safe to show vulnerability without feeling weak, he begins to integrate his physical desires with his emotional needs. Sex, in this case, is no longer just an act of pleasure, but a means of reinforcing emotional security and mutual trust. He no longer seeks intimacy just for the sake of validation or gratification, but as an extension of love, partnership, and mutual growth. The shift from purely physical intimacy to deep emotional connection requires self-awareness. A man must first recognize his own patterns, whether he uses sex as an escape, a form of validation, or a genuine expression of connection. He must be willing to examine his beliefs about intimacy, question the narratives he has absorbed from society, and allow himself to redefine what sex means to him. When a man reaches this level of awareness, his entire perspective on intimacy transforms. He begins to see sex as a shared experience rather than an individual pursuit. He becomes more attuned to his partner's needs, emotions, and energy. He understands that true fulfillment in intimacy does not come from conquest or validation, but from a deep, reciprocal connection that transcends the physical. Right? This is where sex shifts from being something temporary and transactional to something meaningful and transformative. The neurochemistry of sex plays a profound role in shaping how men experience and interpret intimacy. At its core, sex is not just a physical act, but a cascade of neurochemical reactions that influence emotions, behaviors, and long-term connections. The interplay of dopamine, oxytocin, testosterone, and other neurotransmitters creates a powerful and often unconscious pattern that drives male sexual perception and decision-making. Dopamine, often called the pleasure chemical, is a primary driver of desire and motivation. When a man experiences sexual attraction, his brain releases dopamine, creating a sense of excitement and reward. This is the same neurotransmitter responsible for the pleasure derived from food, success, and even addictive behaviors. The more novel and stimulating the experience, the greater the dopamine surge. And the second phase leads us toward, this is why men often crave the excitement of new sexual experiences, as their brains associate novelty with heightened pleasure. However, this mechanism can also lead to patterns of chasing external stimulation rather than cultivating deeper connections. A man whose brain is conditioned to seek high dopamine spikes may prioritize short-term pleasure over long-term intimacy, leading to cycles of attraction and disinterest. Testosterone, the dominant male hormone, further amplifies this process by increasing libido, competitiveness, and sexual assertiveness. High levels of testosterone drive men to pursue sexual experiences more aggressively, reinforcing the link between desire and action. This hormone also affects risk-taking behaviors, making men more likely to engage in impulsive sexual decisions when their testosterone levels are elevated. Lastly, estrogen increases the risk of development of postmenopausal women. Interestingly, testosterone levels fluctuate based on environment, lifestyle, and emotional state. A man who feels powerful, confident, or successful will naturally have higher testosterone levels, increasing his drive for intimacy. On the other hand, stress, failure, or emotional disconnection can lower testosterone, leading to decreased sexual desire and motivation. Beyond dopamine and testosterone, oxytocin plays a crucial role in deepening emotional bonds. While often associated with women in childbirth, oxytocin is also released in men during physical touch, intimacy, and orgasm. This hormone fosters trust, attachment, and a sense of emotional security. The more oxytocin released during sex, the stronger the emotional connection a man feels toward his partner. However, not all men experience oxytocin-driven bonding equally. Those who have been conditioned to separate sex from emotion may not consciously recognize the attachment forming, while others who are emotionally open will feel a deep sense of connection after intimacy. Vasopressin, another bonding hormone, further influences how men perceive sex. Unlike oxytocin, which creates warmth and trust, vasopressin is associated with territoriality, protectiveness, and long-term commitment. Studies suggest that men with higher vasopressin levels are more likely to form monogamous bonds and experience a strong sense of loyalty toward their partners. This indicates that, for some men, sex is not just about pleasure, but about reinforcing a deep-seated instinct to protect and commit to a partner they feel emotionally safe with. The interaction of these neurochemicals explains why men experience varying levels of attachment after sex. Some may feel an immediate emotional bond, while others may disengage once the dopamine high wears off. This is why self-awareness is essential in understanding personal patterns of intimacy. A man who recognizes the biochemical processes at play can begin to make more conscious choices about his relationships. So, we previously spoke about what happens when we enter into a relationship. A wide spectrum survey of research, instead of being driven purely by dopamine-seeking behaviors, he can cultivate deeper connections by engaging in intimacy with intention and emotional presence. Coordinating tasks and tracking progress together is what Deborah speaks to. Ultimately, the neurochemistry of sex is not just about the mechanics of attraction, but about how men experience desire, attachment, and emotional fulfillment. By understanding these biochemical influences, men can move beyond reactive patterns and cultivate a more conscious and meaningful approach to intimacy. A man's perception of sex is not just shaped by biology and immediate emotions, but also by deep-seated subconscious conditioning. From a young age, men absorb messages about intimacy, attraction, and their own roles in relationships, often without even realizing it. These messages come from family dynamics, societal expectations, past experiences, media portrayals, and cultural norms, all of which influence how a man views sex, love, and emotional connection. One of the most powerful forces shaping a man's perception of intimacy is early childhood conditioning. The way a man was nurtured, how affection was expressed in his family, and how relationships were modeled to him all play a significant role in his subconscious beliefs about sex and love. If he grew up in a household where love was conditional, where affection was given only when something was achieved, he may subconsciously associate intimacy with performance or validation. If he was taught that vulnerability is a weakness, he may struggle to connect sex with emotional openness, choosing instead to keep his relationship surface level. Conversely, if he grew up in an environment where love and emotional expression were freely given, he may naturally view sex as a deeper act of connection rather than just physical pleasure. Beyond family, societal expectations shape how men view sex. In many cultures, masculinity is often linked to sexual conquest, with men being subtly or overtly taught that their worth is tied to their ability to attract and engage in sexual relationships. This conditioning creates a subconscious script where sex becomes not just an act of pleasure, but a form of validation. For some men, this manifests as a relentless pursuit of new partners, not necessarily out of desire, but because they have been conditioned to believe that their masculinity is measured by their sexual success. This can lead to a disconnect between physical intimacy and emotional fulfillment, where sex is pursued as an external measure of self-worth rather than a genuine expression of connection. Past relationships and personal experiences also contribute to subconscious conditioning. A man who has experienced betrayal, heartbreak, or emotional rejection may develop protective barriers that influence how he approaches intimacy. If he has been hurt before, his subconscious mind may associate deep emotional connection with pain, leading him to keep relationships casual or avoid vulnerability altogether. On the other hand, if he has experienced safe and loving connections, his subconscious programming will reinforce the idea that sex can be a pathway to emotional intimacy and mutual fulfillment. Media and cultural narratives further reinforce these patterns by constantly shaping perceptions of romance and sexuality. Movies, music, and social media often depict exaggerated ideals of relationships, where attraction is immediate, passion is effortless, and emotional depth is rarely explored. These portrayals subtly condition men to expect instant gratification, fostering unrealistic standards for relationships and intimacy. A man who internalizes these messages may struggle with long-term commitment, always seeking the excitement of something new rather than building deeper connections with one person. All of these subconscious influences operate beneath the surface, guiding a man's decisions, desires, and behaviors without his conscious awareness. However, the good news is that conditioning is not permanent. A man who becomes aware of these patterns can begin to rewrite his subconscious beliefs about sex and relationships. Through self-reflection, mindfulness, and conscious effort, he can break free from limiting narratives and develop a healthier, more intentional approach to intimacy. By understanding how subconscious conditioning shapes his perception of sex, a man gains the power to make choices that align with his true desires, rather than simply acting on ingrained patterns. This awareness allows him to move beyond automatic behaviors and create relationships based on authenticity, emotional connection, and mutual respect. www.fwa.org, FUMWORG, FYPF.org. Ultimately, breaking free from unconscious conditioning is the key to experiencing deeper, more meaningful intimacy, where sex becomes not just an act, but a shared experience of trust, connection, and transformation. Sex is often viewed as a purely physical act, but on a deeper level, it is an exchange of energy that affects both individuals involved. Every human being carries an energetic field, a unique frequency that is shaped by thoughts, emotions, and past experiences. When two people engage in intimacy, their energies merge, creating a powerful exchange that can either be uplifting and healing or draining and disruptive. Every human being has an energetic field, or draining and disruptive. Whether or not someone is consciously aware of it, this energetic transfer influences their emotional state, mental clarity, and even physical well-being. Men, like women, are constantly transmitting and receiving energy, but their conditioning often leads them to focus more on the physical experience of sex rather than the emotional or energetic impact. When a man engages in sex unconsciously, purely for pleasure, conquest, or escape, he may not realize that he is also absorbing the emotions, traumas, and energetic imprints of his partner. If he is intimate with someone carrying deep emotional wounds, unresolved pain, or negative energy, that energy does not simply disappear. It lingers within his own field, subtly influencing his thoughts, emotions, and future interactions. Over time, if a man repeatedly engages in intimacy without awareness of this energetic exchange, he may find himself feeling emotionally exhausted, disconnected, or even burdened without understanding why. On the other hand, when a man approaches sex with intention and presence, he begins to experience a different level of intimacy, one that is not just physical, but deeply spiritual. He starts to recognize that the quality of energy he brings into a sexual encounter directly affects the experience. If he carries stress, anger, or unresolved emotions, those energies will influence the connection. However, if he enters intimacy with love, mindfulness, and an open heart, the experience transforms into something profound, an opportunity for healing, emotional bonding, and heightened awareness. Ancient traditions and spiritual teachings have long understood the concept of sexual energy as a force of creation, not just biologically, but energetically. In many Eastern philosophies, sexual energy is considered one of the most potent forms of life force, capable of fueling creativity, vitality, and even higher states of consciousness. Like other forms of energy, sexual energy is comprised of up to 15 times. This is why practices like Tantra emphasize the importance of conscious intimacy, where partners are fully present, attuned to each other's energy, and engage in a sacred exchange that transcends mere physical pleasure. When a man learns to harness this energy rather than dissipate it mindlessly, he not only deepens his relationships, but also experiences greater clarity, purpose, and vitality in other areas of life. Another key aspect of sexual energy exchange is the concept of energetic imprints. Every intimate encounter leaves an imprint on the subconscious mind and energy field. If a man engages in multiple fleeting encounters with no emotional depth, he may accumulate fragmented energetic ties that create confusion, restlessness, or an inability to form deeper connections. Conversely, if he chooses his intimate partners with awareness and intention, Ensuring that the exchange is built on mutual respect and emotional alignment, he strengthens his energetic foundation, leading to a more fulfilling and harmonious experience of intimacy. Well, men who want to elevate their understanding of sex beyond the physical, the first step is awareness. Recognizing that intimacy is not just about the body, but also about energy, allows a man to make more conscious choices. It encourages him to approach relationships with more mindfulness, to value emotional and energetic compatibility, and to cultivate deeper connections rather than seeking fleeting pleasure. Ultimately, when sex is seen as an exchange of energy rather than just a physical act, it transforms into a tool for growth, healing, and profound connection. A man who understands this shifts his perspective from mere gratification to something much greater, a conscious, intentional experience that not only fulfills him, but also elevates his partner, creating a cycle of deeper love, respect, and emotional well-being. Sex is not just a momentary act of pleasure. It has long-term psychological and emotional effects that shape a man's behavior, mindset, and approach to relationships. Whether he is aware of it or not, every intimate encounter leaves an imprint on his subconscious mind, reinforcing patterns that influence how he experiences love, attachment, and even self-worth. These effects can be either positive, leading to deeper emotional fulfillment and personal growth, or negative, causing disconnection, anxiety, or even avoidance of intimacy. Understanding the psychological impact of sex allows a man to make more conscious choices about his relationships and develop a healthier perspective on intimacy. One of the most significant psychological effects of sex is its role in reinforcing emotional attachment. When a man engages in intimacy, his brain releases oxytocin and vasopressin, two hormones associated with bonding and trust. These neurochemicals create a sense of connection with his partner, strengthening the emotional tie between them. However, if he engages in casual sex without emotional investment, his brain still releases these bonding hormones, but without a stable emotional foundation, the connection may feel unstable or confusing. Over time, this can lead to patterns of attachment dysfunction, where he either struggles to form deep bonds or experiences a sense of emptiness after intimacy. Another major psychological effect is how sex influences a man's self-esteem and sense of validation. Many men subconsciously associate their sexual success with their self-worth, a belief reinforced by societal condition. If a man regularly engages in sexual encounters that are purely performance-driven, he may begin to measure his value based on his ability to attract and satisfy partners. This can create a dependency on external validation, leading to a cycle where he constantly seeks new experiences to feel worthy or desirable. On the other hand, when a man views intimacy as an extension of emotional connection rather than a means of validation, he develops a healthier sense of self-worth that is not tied to external factors. Sex also has a profound impact on a man's emotional well-being. When intimacy occurs in a loving, supportive relationship, it can enhance feelings of happiness, security, and contentment. The release of endorphins and serotonin during sex creates a natural mood boost, reducing stress and promoting emotional stability. However, if sex is used as an escape from emotional pain, loneliness, or stress, it can become a temporary distraction rather than a source of genuine fulfillment. Many men turn to sex as a way to avoid dealing with deeper emotional wounds, but in doing so, they often reinforce patterns of emotional suppression rather than healing. You see, additionally, repeated sexual experiences shape a man's perception of relationships and expectations in intimacy. If he has experienced deep emotional intimacy in his sexual encounters, he will likely seek out similar connections in future relationships. However, if his experiences have been transactional, detached, or emotionally unfulfilling, he may develop a belief that intimacy is purely physical, making it difficult for him to connect on a deeper level. Remember, as we talked about before, we track the relationship scorecard, which is basically for any of these 5 things. So if his experiences have been transactional, detached, or emotionally unfulfilling, he may develop a belief that intimacy is purely physical, making it difficult for him to connect on a deeper level. These subconscious beliefs influence not only how he engages in relationships, but also how he views commitment, love, and vulnerability. One of the most overlooked aspects of the psychological effects of sex is its impact on a man's subconscious mind. The brain is constantly forming associations based on repeated experiences, meaning that if a man repeatedly engages in intimacy without emotional depth, his subconscious will normalize that pattern. Conversely, if he cultivates intimacy that is emotionally and energetically fulfilling, his subconscious will begin to expect and seek out deeper connections. This is why self-awareness is crucial. When a man understands how his past experiences shape his present behaviors, he gains the ability to consciously shift his patterns and create more meaningful relationships. Ultimately, sex is not just about physical gratification. It is a psychological and emotional experience that leaves lasting imprints on the mind and soul. A man who understands this begins to approach intimacy with greater awareness, choosing partners and experiences that align with his values and emotional well-being. Instead of allowing past patterns to dictate his future, he takes control of his own narrative, transforming intimacy into a source of growth, healing, and deeper connection. Sex is far more than just a physical act. It is an intricate blend of biology, psychology, subconscious conditioning, energy exchange, and emotional impact. A man's perception of sex is shaped by a variety of factors, from his neurochemistry and past experiences to the cultural narratives he has absorbed and the energetic imprints left by his relationships. Whether he views intimacy as a means of validation, a pursuit of pleasure, or a deep emotional connection depends on his level of self-awareness and personal growth. When a man approaches sex unconsciously, he may find himself caught in cycles of attachment, detachment, or emotional suppression, never fully understanding why he feels disconnected or unfulfilled. However, when he recognizes that sex is not just an external experience, but a reflection of his internal state, he gains the power to transform his approach to intimacy. By becoming aware of the biological, psychological, and energetic aspects of sex, he can make more intentional choices, choosing partners who align with his values, engaging in intimacy with presence and emotional depth, and cultivating relationships that nourish rather than deplete him. True fulfillment in intimacy comes when a man integrates both the physical and the emotional, understanding that sex is not just about what happens in the moment, but about the lasting impact it has on his mind, heart, and soul. When he moves beyond mere gratification and embraces sex as an opportunity for connection, healing, and growth, he shifts from being driven by unconscious patterns